Good morning and welcome to the latest in our series of trainings for the E-Rate Fund Year 2026. This session is being recorded on November 19th, 2025, and we're going to talk today about the steps that you need to go through in order to get set up in EPC, and we're actually going to go a little beyond EPC, and we'll talk about the FCC registration number. We'll also talk about SAM.gov briefly today. Basically, all we're talking about are all of the different accounts that you need to participate in the E-rate program. As I mentioned, that includes the stuff in EPC and the Form 498 if you're receiving funding via the Bear form. But we'll also talk about the FCC registration number, which you get from fcc.gov, and then the Uniform Entity Identifier, or UEI, which you get from sam.gov, which is a relatively new website that all recipients of federal funds are supposed to be registered on. So let's start by talking about what you need to do in EPC. Just as a quick review, the EPC is the E-Rate Productivity Center. It's administered by USAC, and it's the portal through which all applications are filed. It's also where all of the related information associated with the E-Rate program gets entered and updated. Within EPC, there are two different levels of accounts that you need to be concerned about as a library. The first is that there's a entity level account that exists for your library or library system. And that entity level account then has users attached to it, which implies then that the second level of account is the actual user account. And those user accounts can be set up for your staffers. And we'll go through how both of these kinds of accounts get set up and what you need to do in order to set them up as part of today's presentation. So when we talk about the entity level accounts, and again, this is the account that exists at the level of your library or library system. Every entity, so that's every library system or library outlet, is identified by what they called a build entity number, or BEN. This is a little bit of a misnomer because you don't necessarily need to be receiving a bill in order to have a build entity number. It probably is best thought of as just an entity number, but after 25 years of acronyms, it's known now as the BEN, BEN. Every library should already have a build entity number unless it was built in the last year or two. MBLC worked very hard, and one of the last things that Paul Kissman did with the E-rate program before he retired to go ahead and make sure that all of the libraries in Massachusetts had build entity numbers, and it was a pretty significant task. If that build entity number already exists, then you may only need to have a user account created and then associated with that build entity number. So if your build entity number already exists, you don't need to go through the process that we're about to talk about for creating a new build entity number. If it doesn't, though, you will need to go through the various steps to create your build entity number. And the way to check that is to go ahead and use the build entity search tool, which is linked at the bottom of the page there. And this search tool, which you can also find at opendata.usac.org, allows you to go through all of the entities that are in USAC's database and find if your library already exists. So in this case, let's go ahead and look for a library or library system located in, say, Natick, Massachusetts. So we will go ahead and click first on entity type and select library and library system, and then click apply. Under physical state, we'll select Massachusetts, or we'll type in Massachusetts and then select it, and then click apply. And then under physical city, we'll type in Natick, and then scroll down and click apply. And what you can see over here, if we mouse over the blue bar to the left, there are three libraries listed as being in Natick. And if we look down here at the table that's down below, we can move that over so we can read the names. And you'll see that that's the Bacon Free Library, the Minuteman Library Network, and their main library, and then the Morse Institute Library. And then for each one of them, the build entity number is located just to the right in the second column. If you were searching for your library and couldn't find your library or its entity number, then you need to go through and create a new library entity number. That process isn't terribly complicated. If you find that you need to create a new entity, you just need to reach out to USAC to create both the build entity number for your library and to create an initial user account for the administrator that will be associated with that library. You can do that by calling them to open a case. That number is 888-203-8100, as shown on the slide. And they're going to ask you to provide a letter to them on letterhead from your library with a bunch of different information. And I've included that information here on the slide so that it's easy for you to reference. You'll see that the reason they need this information is that all this information ends up getting pre-populated into the entity record when you go into EPC. And we'll go and take a look at that in just a moment. So when you are creating an entity or when you are looking at an entity in EPC, there are some key data points to look at. First, for the library system, if you have a system, and then for the individual library or libraries, if you have multiple outlets. So for the library system, really the key information is just making sure that you have the correct legal name for your library that will end up matching the name that is on the bills from your service provider, and that the address, both physical and mailing address, are correct and will match the addresses that are shown on whatever bills you receive from your service providers. If you are either an individual library, so a library with just a single outlet, or you are one of the outlets within a library system, you also need to put some additional information in related to your library. So for each outlet or branch of a library, the key data that you need to input into EPC is the urban or rural status of your library and the library type, which in most cases is going to be public because there aren't a whole lot of private libraries. Whether you're part of a library system, whether you're a main library, whether you're part of a library consortium, or in Massachusetts, we refer to them as the networks. In E-rate speak, they're called consortia. Whether a particular outlet is a bookmobile, et cetera. And we will walk through in just a moment sort of where you see all of that information and how you indicate each of those. For each library system, there needs to be a main library. So there needs to be the headquarters library, as it were. And that main library needs to then get linked to the local school district. The reason for that is that that main library is what is going to determine what the discount rate is for the entire library system, and it pulls that discount rate information from the school district. The last critical part of information that you need for each library is the square footage of each outlet. And the reason you need that is it determines what your Category 2 budget will be. And we've talked about the Category 2 budget in the previous presentation that we did for 2026. We'll also cover it in the next set of presentations when we talk about procurement and contracting and all of that. So with that, let's go ahead and move over and take a look real quickly at what this looks like within the EPC system. So I'm going to go ahead and switch windows. All right. And you should now see a live version of the training website for E-rate, which looks very similar to what you'll see when you log into EPC. So once you've set up an entity or an entity has already been set up within EPC, if you need to update the information associated with the individual libraries within your library system, you click on the name of your library system here. If you are just a single library, you can just click on the name of your library and it'll do the same thing and bring us to a page that looks a lot like this. We're then going to click on additional information and select related organizations. Excuse me, close that. We're not interested in the AI. And we will go under related organizations. We select related entities. And what that related entities does is it just lists all of the different library outlets that are within our library system. So in this case, my fake library system that is set up in this training portal has two outlets. There's a main library and then there's the Dudley Library branch. If your library system had, say, a dozen different library branches, it would list all of those library branches here. If you discover that any of your library branches are missing, you need to reach out to USAC and get those library branches or outlets added. And I would strongly urge you to include me or Kate from MBLC in that process. We can certainly help you expedite that. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and click on main library for system 10036, and that brings up the basic information for my library. Now you recall just a moment ago when I said if you were just a single library rather than a library system, you could just click on your library name. That would bring you to this exact same page. So once we are here at this page, if we scroll down the page, you'll see it has all of the basic information for our library system. So it has a name, it has an entity number, which is the build entity number that we were talking about before. It lists physical and mailing addresses. And as we scroll down, you'll see that it lists some of the other information that we were talking about. So we've got urban rural status over here. We've got all of the subtypes that we were just talking about. So public libraries, bookmobiles, kiosks, main branch, etc. Also, whether it's part of a library system and the school district in which the main branch is located. Last but not least, and very importantly, we've got the category 2 square footage down here at the bottom. Now, if any of this information is incorrect or needs to be updated or changed, it's relatively easy to do that. You simply click on Manage Organization up here at the top of the page, and you'll see that all of these fields are now here and can be edited. For example, one of the things it asks for is, and you're not required to put it in, but you've got latitude and longitude. If you put that information in, you can have it look up your urban rural status. It'll also pull that information, if need be, from your address. There are a couple different ways that it can find your urban rural status. And USAC will, if you change your urban rural status, USAC will then confirm that in the next round of review when your application is going through. If you continue to scroll down the page, you can see here that we've got all the library subtypes listed. So we've got public and private. Obviously, you can only select one of those. But then of the other subtypes, you can simply check all of the ones that apply. So if this were for a bookmobile, for example, I could just go ahead and check the bookmobile box. Similarly, for a kiosk or tribal library, I can go ahead and select those options. It asks for the FSCS number, but that's not required. The FSCS number, for those of you who have been around for a while, is the identifier that is assigned by IMLS to each library, but you're not required to include that here. You also have the ability to change your square footage. So I'm going to go ahead and just change this to 3,000 from 3,500, just so you can see that it updates and gets modified as we work through the process. Last but not least, because this is the main library in the district, we can indicate what school district it's associated with. So to do that, you would search for the school district. You would search either by the build entity number of the school district, the name, the state, and or the zip code, and then click search, and that'll bring up all of the school districts that meet excuse me, those particular requirements. All right, and with that, I can go ahead and hit submit. It will ask me to give it a nickname. So I'm going to just say C2 square footage update and then click submit. These nicknames aren't important. It's really more so that you can keep track of what modifications you've made to the system over time. And that takes us back to the display page for the library itself. If we go ahead and scroll down, we'll see that the category 2 square footage information has been updated down here. Now, that modifies the Category 2 budget. And while this is a little bit of a derail to today's topic, I just wanted to clarify and let you all know that the Category 2 budget information has been updated and is now available within EPC. To get to it, you can just go ahead when you're looking at your library or any entity within your library, you can click on Category 2 budget and then click on Category 2 budget information. If you are looking at a branch within your system, it'll tell you to pull that information from the library system. So we'll click on the library system and then click Category 2 Budget and click Get Category 2 Budget Information. And you'll see now that we have three top level groupings. We've got the 2026 through 2030. That's the current Category 2 budget information. And you'll see that it automatically opens that up and shows that we have a forecast budget of $60,350. Now it's pulling that forecast budget. If I click on Show Details over here on the right, it's pulling that budget from our various library branches. To figure out where those branch allocations come from, I can click the Show Allocation Breakdown. Oh, it's not going to show me now. It's supposed to show you first where the budget numbers come from, so the square footage. And then secondly, down here, it'll also show you if you have filed any 471s, what the 471s were for in terms of how much of your Category 2 budget has already been allocated. For the 2026 through 2030, it's not going to show anything for you, but if you have applied in the past, for Category 2. You can have it show you that remaining budget from the past, and it'll look the same after 2026 if you've applied for Category 2. You can see here in this library that it applied for $17,169 back in 2024, and so that has come out of its $50,000 budget, leaving a budget of $32,000 and change. Okay. That let's go back here to the presentation real quickly. So that's what you have to do at the entity level. However, within EPC, we also have accounts that occur at the individual user level, and you need to log into an individual user account in order to access anything within EPC. Importantly, those EPC accounts are linked to email addresses and are non-transferable. So once an email address has been used for a particular user, you can't reuse that email address for another person. You can't rename that person. It just doesn't work that way. And so I strongly recommend that you have individualized email addresses for each of the staff who are going to have EPC accounts. So, for example, don't go with a director at yourlibraryname.city.ma.us as the email address that you use. Use something that is customized to the actual person so that, for example, rather than having director, it could be the name of the director. And why is that important? Well, when the current director leaves and the new director comes in, they're going to need to create a new account. And if their email address is also director at and then the library name, they're going to need to set up a different email address. So for each user account, you're required to include all of your basic contact information, so name, email, title, etc. One other important piece of information that you need when you're setting up an account is you need to figure out what the rights are for that person, in particular, whether that person is going to be the account administrator. If you are creating a new account administrator because you don't have access to the EPC account, you end up having to send a letter to USAC, and that process is very similar to what we talked about a couple slides ago when you're setting up an entity account. In this case, you generally need to just set up the initial user account on library letterhead and send that in to USAC. As with all things information technology, having an administrator is key because the administrator is the one who sets up individual user accounts under that administrator and under that library, and then assigns the rights to those users. So, why would you have multiple users? Well, for example, you might have one set of rights and privileges for the person who deals with IT in your district, in your library system, another for the person who might deal with invoicing and manages the business side of things within your library. So it's important to make sure that you have an administrator set up and then you have the right privileges set up for each of your sub users. So let's go through what that looks like. Again, we'll bounce back into the library system. And I'm going to just go ahead and go to the homepage for the library system. This is where you should land when you first log in. What we'll do is we'll go ahead and click here on Manage Users. And what that will do is take us to a page and it says, here are my organizations. You need to check the box next to the name of your library. And then you can go through and either create a new user, add and remove existing users, or manage user permissions. So let's start with create a new user. And I'm going to just call this library user 2. Not give them middle initial. Job title is just going to be EPC user. You have to give them a phone number, but most importantly, you need to give them an email address. And I'm going to call this library@mailinator.com. Oh. You would put in an actual email address here. I'm using Mailinator because that's just allows you to use a fake email address. By default, the address that's filled in will be the address of the library. You can change that if you need to. And then most importantly, perhaps in all of this is setting up the user permissions. And so you'll see here we can set up EPC user permissions, which is what we're concerned about for libraries that are applying for E-rate. If you were talking about the cybersecurity program, you could check this button here for CBR, and it would change what permissions you have, but we're going to stick with EPC. And then it allows you to, for each different level of form, you can for each of the different forms, you can set the level of permissions that a person has. So your user, for example, by default, only has the rights to view the various kinds of forms. Now, that may work well if all you want is somebody who can look at forms, but in most cases, you're going to want somebody who can edit the forms or certify the forms. And so for each different form, you have 3 levels of user, at least 3 levels. There's full, there's partial, and there's view only. So the difference between these view only, as the name implies, just allows you to view. Partial allows you to data enter the form and edit the form, but does not allow you to certify a form. And then full allows you to certify the form. Now, these rights are the same for most of the forms. There are some exceptions. So the 498, for example, here in the middle, you have 3 levels of access, which are no access. They can't see it at all. General financial contact, which allows somebody to view the information, but not to change everything. And then school or library official, which allows you to modify the contents. And this is important because the 498 is where you figure out who gets the actual money. So it's critically important to make sure that these are correct. If you want to give somebody full privileges or partial privileges on all of the forms, you can at the far left simply click under Apply All and then select the level of rights that you want. In this case, I'm going to say full privileges for all. And you'll see it's given us full privileges for all of the forms. And then the form 498, it's indicated we're a school or library official where we have full rights. So then go ahead and click Continue. It indicates that the user will be given the rights that have been specified. We click Yes, and it's gone ahead and created a new user. Um, it wants us to confirm the details, so we go back over, look, it all looks good. We click Submit, click Yes again, and that user has now been created. Um, let's go back in real quickly and look at Manage Users. And then let's look at managing existing users. Uh, let's look first at user permissions. So if we click on, oh, sorry, we need to select the organization first on the left and then click Manage User Permissions. And then down here, you'll see we have now three different users. There were the two that existed before, but then there's the library user two, the one that we just created. And you can see for each of the users that exist, as the administrator, I can go in and change what those permissions are after the fact. So, for example, for the user that we just created, if I wanted to change them so they only had partial post-commitment permissions, which would be the ability to work on various documents like Form 500, etc., I could change that, then click Submit, click Yes, and then when we go back, look again at the permissions associated with the users, you'll see now that they have partial permissions. If we go ahead and cancel out of that, and you'll see it's the user interface is frustratingly designed where it bounces you out of the manage users interface entirely every time you change something. The last thing I want to go over is the add or remove existing users. So if you are in a situation where there are users that have been set up for your library, but you no longer need those users to be listed as part of your library, you can go ahead and remove them entirely. Um, the way to do that is, let's see here. Sorry. You click on the user, you then go to, if I recall correctly, yes, related actions, and then you can deactivate the user. And no longer at library, you put in your notes, click submit, confirm, and then you'll see if we go back into the manage user interface and we go into manage user permissions, you'll see that that new user that we just created is no longer listed because they've been deactivated. All right. I know that that's a lot and a little bit confusing, but I hope that that was relatively straightforward. All of this is included in the slides, so if you have questions, you certainly can refer to the slides that are distributed with this training. You can also always reach out with any questions that you have. Now, you can only modify things within EPC during a set time period, and that time period is called the administrative window. It typically spans from mid to late October through mid-January, and that's when they want you to make any changes to your profile. Since that administrative window is now open, now is the perfect time for you to go ahead and update your profile in EPC if that's necessary. As I mentioned before, MBLC and I worked with USAC a couple of years ago to get entity information corrected and updated for all of the libraries in Massachusetts. I think we got everybody, but if there are issues with your entity, we are more than happy to help. Please reach out to me or to Kate, and we can assist you with getting the information in EPC corrected and updated. Next, I want to transition to talking about the Form 498, which technically isn't an account, but it's a form that needs to be filed within EPC, and it's something that you typically only do when you're setting up an account or when there are very limited circumstances, like you're changing your bank. So the Form 498 is basically where you set up your payment information, and it provides USAC with your bank's information. So your account number, your routing number, and then the proof of your account number, which you provide as a voided check or bank statement. It's not really required until the invoicing part of the process, and at this point, it's only required if you have if you are filing for discounts using the Bear form. However, USAC and the FCC have talked about making the Form 498 mandatory for all participants in the E-rate program. And so we thought it would be important to go ahead and include this information here as part of today's training. One of the critical things about the Form 498 is that the banking information that you include here in the Form 498 needs to match the banking account information that you include when you set up your account with sam.gov. So you want to be sure that you have included the same account number and routing number in the Form 498 that you've used in sam.gov. So let's bounce back into the EPC interface and we can go through real quickly what you need to do in order to file the Form 498. Now, unlike virtually every other form that you encounter in the E-rate program, which is they're all listed up here in the top right, you'll see that the Form 498 isn't listed there. In order to get to the Form 498, you need to click on your library or library system name and then click on Related Actions. And then you scroll down until you find the Form 498, which is about halfway down the list of forms that are available. You then click on Create Form 498. And because I don't have all of the account information, everything else available here, I'm going to bounce back into the slides just to sort of show you what this process looks like. So once you get into the Create an FCC Form 498, you need to give it a nickname for starters, like you do with pretty much all E-rate forms. That's what you put here in this top box. Usually, I recommend that the nickname that you give it be a descriptive name that establishes why you are filing a new Form 498. It would typically, for me, include a date and information about why. So, for example, it could say November 19th, 2025, move to Bank of Boston. You can then, underneath that, it lists organization information, and that will have your library organization. Underneath that, you'll find there's some very interesting information that they request. The name your company is doing business as, or formerly known as, and your holding company's name. Now, you might be saying, why would it possibly be asking for this information for a library? And the answer is pretty simple. The Form 498 was set up and designed to be used by service providers for service providers to provide their information. And a couple years ago, USAC and the FCC decided they were going to jerry-rig it and basically set it up so that libraries and schools would also need to file the Form 498. This form is not set up for for libraries and other users. It is set up for for-profit companies. And so a number of the fields that are requested within this form don't make any sense within the context of a library completing the form. As long as it's not a mandatory form, it's okay. One thing that may cause some confusion is the business type, which you have to select down here at the bottom. It's usually relatively straightforward for libraries. You're typically going to select either county government or a city or township government or a regional organization. But if none of those accurately describe what you want, you can just go ahead and select other down at the bottom. It doesn't really matter. Again, most of these entity types that are listed up here really have to do with for-profit service providers or other kinds of organizations that aren't even eligible typically within the E-rate program. So again, it's very confusing, but you should be able to select either if you're part of the township government or town government, you can select the city or town government. Otherwise, generally, I advise libraries to just select other. Next, they ask for you to select your general, I'm sorry, you then click Save and Continue, and they next ask you to enter your general financial contact. This needs to be somebody with an account set up within EPC. So if your financial contact doesn't yet have an account set up in EPC, go back to the getting set up in EPC portion of the presentation that we just covered and go ahead and add that user into your account. You can then come in and once you start typing the name of your general financial contact into this field, it should pull it automatically from EPC and you should be able to just click on it. You'll then be able to click Save and Continue and they will ask you for your federal employee identification number. Now, this number, the EIN, is the taxpayer ID number that's associated with your library. It should be relatively straightforward. This should also match the number that is in sam.gov and also associated with your FCC registration number. So once you've put that in, you can ignore the Dun and Bradstreet number field below that. And go ahead and click Save and Continue. They will then ask you for a remittance contact. So this is who checks will be sent to. They'll first ask if it's the same as the general financial contact. You can click yes if that's the case, and it will pre-fill all of the information. If that's not the case, you need to go ahead and fill in all of the information associated with, in theory, who a check would be sent to. Now, it's really important to note that they actually don't send checks. It all gets transferred electronically, but this is the contact person if there are issues. In addition, if you scroll down the page, you get to the financial information. Now, the financial information is the most important piece of everything that gets submitted on the Form 498. That's where you indicate your financial institution, which is your bank, your account number for an ACH transfer, and then the transit number for your bank. Now, all of this information should be readily available either on your checks or from your bank account's website. I'm sorry, your bank's website. When you're in your account, you should be able to pull this information up. So this is all relatively easy to get and something that your finance person should have easy access to. What gets confusing here is you'll see that there is a field down here at the bottom left where there's the opportunity for you to upload a file. And there are no instructions associated with what you're supposed to put there on this form. This is where you put your proof of having that account. And so there are generally two different documents that are accepted here. One is a copy of a canceled check. So if you simply void out a check that shows the financial institution, the name of your library, and has the appropriate matching account and transit numbers on the check, you can void that check out, scan it, and attach it here. You can also attach a copy of a bank statement from your bank for your library here, as long as it has the bank name, the library name, and then the appropriate account number information. It would be useful if it actually told you here that that's what they were looking for. It doesn't. But if you don't upload a file here, they will not process your Form 498. So just keep that in mind and make sure that you have that voided out check or a PDF copy of a bank statement that you can go ahead and upload, and then go ahead and click Save and Continue down at the bottom right corner. Next, it asks you if there are additional entities that you want to associate with your Form 498. Now, this can happen if you want to, for example, associate multiple libraries, like if you had multiple independent libraries that were using the same checking account for whatever reason, or the same banking account, you could do that. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense in the context of libraries. It makes a whole lot more sense when you think of it in the context of for-profit companies where they might have, for example, Verizon of Massachusetts and Verizon of Connecticut and Verizon of Maine or something like that, where they might want to add their additional entities here. For you, it doesn't make any difference in most instances. So, in general, folks tend to leave that blank if they're completing this for libraries and just click Save and Continue down at the bottom right. The service identification just indicates what kind of communication you're going to be receiving. And this is, as long as it says school or library or other billed entity recipient, you're fine. If you were a service provider, it would have different information here, and you want to be sure that it says that you're a school or library. You can then go ahead and click Continue to Certification at the bottom right of the page. And they then ask you to certify that the information in the form is correct and that you're authorized to submit the form. Once you've checked both of these boxes here, the blue certify button at the bottom right will light up. You can go ahead and click certify, and then the form will be submitted. So we're going to stop here for just a moment and see if there are any questions. Okay, I don't see any questions popping up. There aren't any questions in the chat. So we're going to go ahead and move into the next piece of today's presentation, where we talk about the FCC registration number. Okay, so as we said at the beginning of the presentation, we're talking about different kinds of accounts today. The FCC registration number is a completely separate account that you need to set up with the FCC that sets up a number for your library. Now, the good news is there's almost certainly an FCC registration number already on file. So we're going to walk through how you check for that, and if there isn't one, how you set one up. So the FCC registration number, which at various times is called an FCCRN or an FRN, the FRN being very confusing since we also use FRN to refer to funding request number in the E-rate program. But either way, the FCC registration number is a registration with the Federal Communications Commission itself. The FCC is, as you probably know, the regulating entity that oversees the E-rate program. And the FCC registration number is linked to your library's EIN. You can have multiple FCC registration numbers for a single EIN. So, for example, if your town and your library use the same EIN, it may be that there are multiple FCC registration numbers, one for your library and one for your town. That's absolutely fine. That's not a problem. But you should always do a search first to see if there's already one for your EIN. Now, just like there is with Epic, there are user level accounts, and then there are entity level accounts, the FCCRN itself. And so we're going to walk through how you do both of those steps as part of today's presentation. So you start by going to fcc.gov, and unfortunately, we don't have a training portal where we can do this live. But I took a bunch of screenshots from a video that they have, and so hopefully this will help you as we walk through. So you start again by going to fcc.gov, and then you click up here at the top where it says Licensing and Databases. And that brings down a drop-down menu here, and the one we're looking for is the one called CORS, which is the FCC Commission Registration System. Once you click on CORS, it'll take you here to the Commission Registration System for the FCC. And the first thing to do always is to check if you already have an FCC registration number. And to do that, on the right-hand side here, click for Search for Public FRN Information. And they have, this takes you to a search field, and you can search by FRN. Actually, let's go ahead and do this particular piece live in the FCC site, because while we can't register for a site, we can certainly search for one. And the important thing to note here is that while the default search field is the FRN, you can also search by business name, last name, and EIN. So If you wanted to search by business name, let's say we wanted to search by Natick again, we could go ahead and click search, and it tells me that it can't find any, but we can refine it using a wildcard character. So let's go ahead and click refine the search. Now it was looking for only things that were named just Natick, but if we put the wildcard on it, it's now anything that starts with Natick. And you can see here that we have in Natick, we have the town, we have the public schools, there's a radio club, etc. So if we were searching for a particular library, we could potentially find that here. So let me refine the search again and give an example that'll show a particular library. So the Pollard Library in Lowell, Massachusetts is the one I'm trying to find here. And it turns out there are a fair number of entities that are start with Pollard that have FCC registration numbers. But you can see here the Pollard Memorial Library right there. We can go ahead and pull up the FCC registration number. We know that we're good to go. Now, chances are pretty good that some of the other information may be outdated. And if that's the case, we're going to want to register a user account, associate it with the library, and then update the relevant information. You can see over here on the right-hand side under the reg date column that a lot of these registrations look to be pretty old. You see ones from 2000 and 2001 here. So keep in mind the information may be old, but that doesn't mean that you can't use the FCC registration number. So once we've done our search and in the slides, I had it do a search for Swampscott. If you look for Swampscott, you can see we found the Swampscott Public Library. We've got the information. We're good to go. If we need to create a user account for the library within the FCC registration system, we would go back to the licensing and databases and click on cores, and then click to register and update username account. If you already have an account, you can log in using your username and password, but chances are pretty good you don't have an account. To create a new account, you go ahead and click where it says create new account. In fact, just click on the word account, which is a blue link there. And it asks you to register a username, set a password, and input your personal information, first name, last name, that sort of stuff. It also asks you to provide a security question, phone number, etc. And then you can go ahead and create the account at the bottom. Once your account has been created, you can go ahead and log in to your account using the username and password that you just set. And once you've logged in, you have a couple of different options. You can associate your username to an existing FRN, or you can register a new FRN. If you already have an FRN, like in the Swampscott example or the Pollard example that we just showed, you would click Associate Username to FRN at the top here. If you're creating a new FRN, you would go ahead and click Register New FRN. When you're registering for a new FRN, the system allows you to register for either an entity or an individual. You're going to go ahead and say you're registering for an entity, and then it's going to ask for your contact address, whether it's within the United States. The answer to that's going to be yes. And it then asks you to fill out information for your entity. So this is going to be information for your library. There are a couple things that I want to point out. So as I mentioned before, these are taken from a presentation that the FCC has online where they register for a federal agency. You're not going to be registering for a federal agency. The selections that you want to make here on the entity type, you want to select the state or local agency option. And then under subtype, you want to select other. Okay, and so that's how you would set it up for a library. You would then enter your entity name and your EIN, which you then have to confirm. As I mentioned before, it's really important that the EIN that you use here match what you have listed on your Form 498 and what you're going to list in your SAM.gov entity. So it's just critical that that EIN be constant across them because the federal government uses that to link all of the various accounts that you have. You then need to fill out information for a contact person. The key thing is to have a position, first name and last name. You can leave the other information on the left here blank if you want to. You then need to make sure that you put in the address information and click submit down at the bottom. Once you do that, it'll go ahead and give you a listing of all of the information. You should review it to confirm that it is all correct, and then go ahead and click continue at the bottom of the page. And it will go ahead and assign you an FCCRN immediately if you are setting up a new one. It's important to note that your FCCRN does not expire and that once your entity has an FCCRN, you can go ahead and update all of the information in EPC. If you don't have an FCCRN, in theory, EPC isn't supposed to let you set up an entity. So it may behoove you to go ahead and check for your FCCRN first before you go in and try to set up your library. Now, that said, most libraries are already set up and already have their FCCRNs associated, so you should be good to go. Next, we're going to talk about the last piece of our presentation today, which is setting up an account in SAM.gov. So SAM.gov is a relatively new database, and it is a database that lists all of the entities that do business with or receive funding from the government. So for all grants and other federal funding opportunities, or almost all grants and federal funding opportunities, you need to get registered in SAM.gov and you need to renew your registration on a regular basis. Now, you can go ahead and start applying for E-rate without having an account in SAM.gov, but by the time payments are being dispersed, you must have an account in SAM.gov. And just like we talked about with the FCCRN and with EPC, SAM.gov requires you to have both an individual and entity level accounts and registrations. Those entity registrations need to be renewed annually, and they require that you have your EIN and bank account number included. One of the critical things to know about your entity registration, not your individual registration, but your entity registration, is that it can take 6 weeks or longer for a registration to go through. And that's because they run a number of checks against the entity that you set up. This means it's really important to make sure that you go ahead and get the ball rolling on your SAM.gov account as quickly as possible because it may take a while for them to get around to processing your application and then for them to make those confirmations. To create an account on SAM.gov, again, they don't have a training site that we can use, but I've captured a bunch of screenshots and I'll walk you through the process. So first you go to, as you may have guessed, sam.gov in a web browser. And once you click on sam.gov, you should, if you don't already have a user account, or either way, you should sign into a user account. If you don't already have one, the process is the same. So click at the top right where it says sign in. And if you already have an account, you can just click on the blue sign in button here on the left-hand side. If you need to create a new account, you click where it says create an account. For existing users, you sign in, you put in your email address and your password below that, and then click sign in. If you click create an account, it'll allow you to enter your email address, and then you need to check the box to accept the rules of use and then click submit. It will then send you an email with a link to confirm your email address. Once you receive that email in your email, you can go ahead and click on the link that it includes in there, and it will take you to a page where it asks you to go ahead and create a password. Now, that password needs to be a relatively strong password. It needs to be a minimum 12 characters. I believe it requires upper, lower, and a symbol, or maybe it's upper, lower, and a number. Long story short, make sure that you use a good password here, and then go ahead and click continue at the bottom. It then requires you to set up a second layer of authentication for your account. It's up to you to determine what you use. For most users, they'll either use an authentication app or text or voice message, similar to what you have with your bank or other accounts that require two-factor authentication. Once you've gone ahead and set up your authentication and authenticated your login, you can then go ahead and continue to sam.gov. And you do that by clicking on the Agree and Continue button here at the bottom. It then will request, once you've signed in to sam.gov, it'll request that you set up your profile. That is then when we get around to putting in all of the usual information that you expect, things like your first name and last name, your phone number, etc. All of that information gets plugged into your account, and then you are logged in and you can actually start using sam.gov. Once you are in sam.gov, what you want to do is go ahead and find the entity that you're looking for to pull out or confirm that it has a UEI, which is a unique entity identifier. To do that, click where it says entity information on the left, and then you can do either a simple search or a complex search at the bottom left, where you can go ahead and put in the name of the entity that you're looking for and start that search process. Now, chances are very, very good that there's already a UEI in existence for your library. There are literally millions and millions of UEIs at this point. If, on the other hand, you discover that your entity does not exist in sam.gov, it's not the end of the world, but you will need to go ahead and create a UEI for sam.gov. As I mentioned before, this process can take about 6 weeks for them to verify it. There is a video available that walks you through the process of creating a new entity, and I put it at the link that's in the presentation there. In addition to all of the basic information that you're typically going to need, name, address, etc., you're going to need the EIN associated with your library. You're going to need what's called a cage code. And if you don't have a cage code, they will assign one to you. And then last but not least, you need all of the bank information, just like you did for the Form 498. So you'll need the account type, the routing number, and the account number. The registration application is super long because sam.gov is designed to collect information from a wide variety of entities, not just from libraries. So a lot of the information that they are seeking to collect will not apply to you as a library per se. You can skip over most of that. But just be aware that they are going to ask you for a lot of information that will make you sort of scratch your head and say that doesn't apply to us. That's okay. It's okay to not put information into those fields. And last but not least, with respect to sam.gov, just remember that the entity registrations do take an extended period of time. They can take 6 weeks or more. Right now, I suspect they are probably taking more given the backlog from the shutdown. So the sooner you can get your process started in sam.gov, the better off you'll be. So with that, we're going to go to just a couple of final thoughts associated with all of these presentations. As always, we do have additional trainees coming down the pike. We are working on putting together a new training that will cover the new State Master contract, as well as potentially the old State Master contract. So we will publicize that as soon as that is available. We're also going to be providing training in the next month or so on bid evaluation contracts, and then in January on the Form 471. And of course, we'll cover all of the subsequent steps in the process as well. Those trainings will be scheduled as they are timely. We will cover the Form 471 around the time the Form 471 window opens up. So you'll have the opportunity to receive that training at the time that it becomes relevant. In the meantime, make sure in EPC and the FCC registration number and SAM.gov that all your information is complete and that your accounts are all set up. If you have questions, please don't be afraid to ask. You can ask us on the mailing list. You can reach out to me or to Kate directly. We are more than happy to help you through this process. It is a lot and it can be confusing. You can also reach out to USAC directly. They have their client service center, which is at 888-203-8100, or you can use the Contact Us feature within Epic, which is under Actions. Just click Select and then Contact Us, and they will provide you with responses as well. As always, you should stay in control of your applications. Make sure you know where things are in the process at all times. You should use E-Rate if you think it can be a benefit to you. And last but not least, as always, if there are other topics that you want covered, or if you think that there's something we needed to cover in a little more detail, please let us know. We are eager to make sure that these trainings work for you and cover all of the topics that you want covered so that you can participate in E-Rate. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and take any questions. We're going to terminate the recording. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll take any questions.